On March 24th, 2015, 150 people boarded a routine flight from Barcelona to Düsseldorf. Families were texting loved ones, tourists were heading home, crew members prepared for another normal trip across Europe. But just 30 minutes after takeoff, something terrifying happened inside the cockpit. The captain was locked out. The aircraft began descending, and for 8 horrifying minutes, a fully functional passenger jet flew straight into the French Alps. This was not bad weather. It was not engine failure. It was not terrorism from outside the plane. According to investigators, the danger was already inside the cockpit. This is the chilling story of Germanwings Flight 9525, the flight that never landed. Germanwings Flight 9525 was a scheduled passenger flight operated by Germanwings, a low-cost airline owned by Lufthansa. The aircraft was an Airbus A320, one of the most widely used and trusted passenger planes in the world. Its route was simple: depart from Barcelona, Spain, and land in Düsseldorf, Germany. Nothing about the flight seemed unusual. On board were 150 people, 144 passengers and 6 crew members. Among them were students returning from a school trip, business travelers, families, and airline staff. For everyone on board, this was supposed to be just another ordinary flight. But within less than an hour, it would become one of the most disturbing aviation tragedies in modern history. The day began normally at Barcelona El Prat Airport. Passengers checked in, boarded the plane, and settled into their seats. Flight 9525 was delayed slightly, but nothing serious. At 10:01 a.m. local time, the Airbus A320 finally took off. Inside the cockpit were 2 pilots, Captain Patrick Sondenheimer, an experienced pilot, First Officer Andreas Lubitz, the co-pilot. Everything during takeoff appeared routine. The plane climbed smoothly toward its cruising altitude of around 38,000 feet. Air traffic controllers had no reason to worry. The crew made standard communications. The aircraft showed no signs of technical trouble. From the outside, Flight 9525 looked completely normal, and that's what makes this case so haunting. Because while passengers sat calmly in their seats, the countdown had already begun. At around 10:30 a.m., the aircraft reached cruising altitude. Then something happened that would later become the center of the investigation. The captain left the cockpit, reportedly for a short break, possibly to use the restroom. That left Andreas Lubitz alone at the controls. Moments later, the cockpit voice recorder captured the sound of the cockpit door closing. Then, according to investigators, Lubitz manually changed the aircraft's altitude settings. The plane began to descend, not suddenly, not violently, but steadily, deliberately, and with purpose. Air traffic control soon noticed the plane was losing altitude. They attempted to contact the crew. No response. Inside the cabin, passengers likely had no idea at first what was happening. A descent can feel normal. Planes descend all the time before landing. But this flight was nowhere near Düsseldorf, and it was heading straight toward the mountains. Outside the cockpit, the captain returned. He tried to open the cockpit door. It wouldn't open. He requested access. Then he knocked. Then he pounded on the door. Still nothing. What happened next is one of the most chilling sequences ever recovered from a cockpit voice recorder. The captain, now locked outside the cockpit, tried repeatedly to get back in. At first, the attempts were controlled. Then they became more urgent, then desperate. He banged on the reinforced cockpit door. He called out. He tried to use the emergency access system, but the cockpit door had been secured from inside. And according to investigators, the co-pilot did not respond. Inside the cockpit, the voice recorder reportedly captured something even more disturbing: steady breathing. That detail stunned investigators. There was no sound of panic, no sign of a struggle, no indication that the co-pilot had passed out. Just breathing, calm, controlled, silent. Outside the cockpit, the captain's attempts grew more violent as the aircraft continued descending through the Alps. Time was running out. Air traffic controllers made repeated calls. Military aircraft were not able to intervene in time. The Airbus A320 continued descending. The terrain below was rising fast. Inside the cabin, the realization may have begun spreading among passengers only in the final moments. The plane was descending too low, too fast, and there was no announcement from the cockpit. According to investigators, sounds from the cockpit voice recorder suggest that in the last moments, people on board understood something was terribly wrong. Then came the final impact. At approximately 10:41 a.m., Germanwings Flight 9525 crashed into a mountainside in the French Alps near Le Vernet. The impact completely destroyed the aircraft. There were no survivors. All 150 people on board lost their lives. Rescue teams rushed into a brutal mountain environment, only to find debris scattered across the rocky slope. It was one of the worst aviation disasters in Europe in decades, and at first, nobody understood why it had happened. When a modern Airbus crashes without sending a distress call, investigators immediately ask the obvious questions. Was there a mechanical failure? Was there an explosive decompression? Did the crew become incapacitated? Was it terrorism? But the evidence quickly pointed somewhere else. The aircraft had not suffered catastrophic engine failure. There was no sign of a mid-air breakup. The descent itself was controlled. The plane responded normally. That meant one terrifying possibility: someone in the cockpit was still flying the aircraft, and when investigators recovered the cockpit voice recorder, the truth became even darker. Investigators from France's Aviation Safety Agency began analyzing the cockpit voice recorder. What they found shocked the world. The recording suggested the captain left the cockpit. The cockpit door closed behind him. The co-pilot remained alone inside. The aircraft's altitude was changed manually. The captain repeatedly tried to re-enter. The co-pilot remained silent. The aircraft continued descending until impact. There was no evidence of a hijacker storming the cockpit. No sign of a struggle. No signs that the aircraft was uncontrollable. The plane was functioning. The systems were working. The person at the controls appeared to be making a choice. French prosecutors later stated that the co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, had deliberately crashed the plane. That announcement sent shockwaves across the world, because this was not just an aviation accident anymore. It was something far more disturbing. The crash devastated families across multiple countries. Victims came from Germany, Spain, and many other nations. Entire communities were shattered. One of the most heartbreaking details was that a group of students and teachers returning from an exchange trip were among the dead. As the investigation results became public, the emotional impact only deepened. This wasn't a random failure of machinery. It was, according to investigators, an intentional act carried out from inside the cockpit. News channels around the world covered the story non-stop. Airlines reviewed their procedures almost immediately. Some carriers adopted the two-person cockpit rule, requiring that if one pilot leaves the cockpit, another authorized crew member must remain inside. Mental health screening for pilots also came under intense scrutiny. Medical privacy, reporting systems, and airline oversight all became part of the global debate. The tragedy changed aviation forever. If you want more true aviation mysteries, disaster documentaries, and real-life stories that change the world, subscribe now. because the next story might be even more unbelievable than this one.